just to get our heads around some stuff, and before we get going on approving the meeting minutes and everything, I just wanted to, my thinking, because the committee members filled out that survey on their own and sent it to Cinca. And then Dave also populated more details into that opportunity matrix. And I'm hypothesizing that some of our opinions may change after hearing Dave talk some more.
Sure.
So just as we get through this, I think a lot of where we want to spend time is maybe touching base on some of the initial thoughts on the survey, but then letting Dave expound on the opportunity matrix. And then I think that's going to impact some of our opinions on how we filled out the survey. Okay. So just as I was looking at all the things we want to cover, the opportunity matrix is after the survey results. And I think it's good to touch on the survey results, but I think we'll want to make sure we have more time for what Dave's working on relative to the opportunity matrix. So anyways, a little setting a table there as we get into this for everybody. So to kick things off, or do we have to do a roll call, Keith? Is that what you'd said? We should do a roll call of where we're at?
Yes, so just of the members. Okay. And if it works, you want me to do that roll call for you, Brian?
Yeah, I don't think I'm allowed to, right?
Yep.
Right.
So I'll just do the roll call only of the 8 members.
Tim laughs at me. Tim.
Oh, he's harsh.
I have the same problem. I have the same problem. So
goes up late and then laughs at me. Okay, Tim, I get it.
All right. So I'm just going to do the order in the screen in front of me instead of trying to memorize kind of the position on the dais up there. So Aaron's Torst.
Yes, attending via teleconference from Holland, Michigan.
Very good. Thank you, Nikki. Thompson.
Present from Holland, Michigan.
Christians.
Present from Holland, Michigan.
Feltman.
Here from Holland, Michigan, but wishing was in Florida.
Hemingway.
Attending from Holland, Michigan.
Williams.
Attending from Holland, Michigan.
From some road on Holland, Michigan. We're not sure where yet.
I'm actually going to get off now and get onto my computer. So.
All right. Awesome. And then Pajot.
Also attending from Holland, Michigan.
Excellent. And as of right now, it does not look like member Corbin is with us, but I know that quite often with his job, especially in the middle of COVID, he might join us in between, and we'll just note when he does, if he does join us. So, all right, I'll hand it back to you, Brian.
All right, great. Thanks, Keith. So would anyone like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes or discuss the meeting minutes before moving to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Anyone, did I see Tim second there?
Correct.
Okay, great. Feltman and Hemingway, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, great. Thanks, everybody. Looks like we've got someone moving the screen around here, which is great. So next up is public comment. And I'm handing that off to Becky to be the facilitator of, apparently. So Becky, you are the arbiter of truth now.
It looks like we do not have any, there's no one in the waiting room, I'm sorry. And we can open that up for public comment. Everyone is unmuted.
I think they have control to unmute if they would like to unmute
Correct.
themselves. They could make a comment, right, Becky?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I've just unmuted myself. I am here for public comment. So.
Great.
Good afternoon. My name is Mika Weiss, and I'm the board president of Petal Holland, a nonprofit active transportation advocacy group committed to making bicycling an easy choice for transportation and recreation in the greater Holland area. I've been enjoying listening in on your meetings, and I appreciate your willingness to spend time on this. Now, I usually run out of time when I'm giving public comment. So right off the bat, I'd like to invite you to please feel free to email me if you have questions about how active transportation might fit into this whole thing that you're working on. petalholland@petalholland.org. And I'm here today to encourage you to consider seriously how active transportation and transit can improve our local emissions picture, and to ask you to set ambitious goals. We do still want to be world class. Now, addressing the transportation sector now is important because transportation has a large ship, small rudder problem. Change happens very, very slowly for a lot of reasons, but it's just the reality of the sector that if you want to see change in 5 to 15 years, you really need to be working on it right now. It's also a sector with a lot of interconnection. So what we do locally ripples outward. And it sounds like our local emissions are better than national emissions. Nationally, the transportation sector contributes 28% of our greenhouse gases. It's the largest emitter by sector. And it's also a sector where we're still seeing a general upward trend of emissions increases. So understanding how locally we relate to the national numbers is important because transportation systems aren't isolated. They interact with each other, they reinforce each other. So for example, the West Michigan Express Holland GR rapid bus line is going to be challenged on the Holland end because of our low level of investment in public transit, which means that you can get here, but it's harder to get around with a car once you get here. And then there's the question of why we're doing this all to begin with. And we know it's to reduce climate impacts as much as possible, but the reason we care about that is so that we can live and so we can live well. And we know that not everyone is able to participate in the same level. So like if a landlord doesn't invest in energy savings, their renters pay for that. Investing in active transportation and transit allows some of these quality of life benefits to be felt by everyone in the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to share with the group?
Thank you, Brian.
Hey, Don.
How you doing?
Good.
A couple of just quick things to mention. Most people can predict what I'm going to say, but I'll say it anyway. One, I've watched all of the meetings and it's been a fantastic technological discussion so far. And we'll look to technology to help us out a lot. But I want, first of all, to emphasize that people matter. And as Keith often says, and Dave, we've done a lot in terms of a new power plant, but we haven't done so well in engaging people to do the things that we need them to do. And so I don't see that as an item on your agenda just yet, but I hope that you'll give some thought to how you can invite people into this discussion. Secondly, as you know, many of us would like to see you discuss the goal before you discuss technology. If you don't have a goal, almost any road will get you there. The current goal is 10 by 2050. The science community is telling us as clearly as they know how that we need to reach 10 by 2030. So I think we have a shared goal, but a different time frame. And I think that's important to your discussion. Two more quick points. Alice people who can't afford to pay their bills today don't have a big role in the community energy plan yet. And I would urge you to give some attention to that. And I'll stop there. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Don.
Anyone else? Okay. Unless if someone's messing with their mute button or thinks that they're talking right now, you're not. So feel free to interrupt me. But otherwise, I think that is it. 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 So, and then we also want to acknowledge the one comment submitted via email from Joyce Mott. So is that a vote? I can't remember, Keith. I'm sorry. Is that a vote, or are we just acknowledging publicly that we received it and it's part of the official record?
No, we've been trying to follow the process where there is actually a motion in support and then a voice vote just to receive and file that formally as part of the record.
Okay. Could I get a motion to acknowledge we received this email?
So
So
moved.
move.
Oh, support.
Everybody gets that one. Second. And nobody seconds it. That's weird.
Second.
Okay, great. I'll pick Nikki and Travis because I think everybody talked every time there. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, lovely. So that is part of the official record. We are acknowledging Joyce's email. Great. Moving right along. Any updates to the resources document worthy of note, Keith or Dave, that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, thanks. I'll take point on this only because I represent the great work that Cinca continues to do in the background on all of this. You will note that there have been some updates, and we're using the methodology where along the far right side, you'll see dates that are added for anything that wasn't part of the initial. So like there on the bottom of the screen there, you see the 11/16/2020, which was the update of that meeting that we had.
Mm-hmm.
If you go down a little bit further, you'll see that we added from 11/30/2020 both a survey that the BPW did on their energy waste reduction program, but also some tips to recognize energy savings. I forget, I think that came from one of the committee members that asked to share that. We gave a little bit more description on the following page about ICLEI, and specifically our partnership with ICLEI, that they have been the ones that we've partnered with to do some measurement and maybe forecasting. So I won't go through every item, but you will see that we have made some updates in this document. And I will admit, last week I did take the week off, and I think I've got about 6 or 7 emails in my email box, some of them from committee members that have made suggestions of changes. We just didn't get those done prior to the meeting today.
Yeah, there's 2 more at the end there, Keith.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, this was opportunity for carbon offsets. I think that was a conversation.
Yeah,
Brian,
so a couple things in there. So this discussion about offsets came into the opportunity matrix, and I think when we look at whether it's corporate entities or other communities that have considered, like Ann Arbor, a zero goal long term, an element of their programs have been offsets. So to help understand what that means, this document that was added was actually the a recent webinar that some BPW folks attended, where Amazon representative gave a presentation on their approach to sustainability in their organization, including their energy goals. And within it, it was a conversation about carbon offsets in there. So there's a little bit of information that could be gleaned there. Obviously, there's a lot more that could be gathered and presented and will be, on that topic. And the other is looking at this concept of different scope emissions. So when you think about direct emissions versus indirect versus supply chain type of emissions, there's some information here to help, the members of the sustainability or the SDT as we move along and start to discuss, or maybe you hear comments from people that want to discuss where the scope of emissions are coming from. So there's just a couple additional resource documents that were added in that regard.
Yep.
Great.
So again, we'll just continue that same method if that works for the committee, where we'll periodically add new resources to this document, and then obviously put the dates there, but try to highlight anything in particular at each meeting.
Okay.
That's great. Thanks. Good, bunch of good info there. And I think for the committee, as we think about all the different things we want to be learning more about, just because a document gets populated there or a webinar or anything like that doesn't necessarily mean that that suffices for our learning experience. I think carbon offsets are a good example of how that, after taking a quick peek at the survey results, like that's something that almost everybody is like interested in learning more about. So that's a good reference document to have and read about, but I'll use that as an example of, we may want to devote a whole meeting to having someone come in and do more of a deep dive on that, and potentially other things as well. So good resources to have, but they aren't necessarily, equivalent to, that's all the learning and research we want to do on those topics. And that might be obvious to everybody, but I thought I would say it.
Thank you, Brian.
Good. So any questions or comments on the resources document and any of the things that were updated from the committee? Okay. So we'll keep plugging away here. The work plan framework, which we put together as an initial draft last week and had a good discussion around. We can spend some time on this right now.
Yeah, the update here, I think, Brian, is if I can just jump in, and Keith, feel free to. What we have here really is some additional drafting that Travis actually did in response to the last meeting, where there were some ideas put forward from some of the committee members, and those made it into a draft outline here. There hasn't been really anything of content put to this yet. More a matter of, I think, Travis, and feel free to jump in here, Travis, it really was a representation of some of the comments that were brought by the committee on the report outline the last go around, and some of those have been slightly modified here in terms of the outline.
That's correct. And I just tried to capture, I know there were several people that had made comments about things we should add in different sections. So again, as I think Dave's calling it an outline is exactly what it is right now, just trying to create some kind of a spot where we're making note that we need to fill this in with information. So, and the type of information we're looking for.
Yeah. And especially relative to some of the commentary around like goals, for instance, that we've had thrown around by a variety of people in other meetings on the committee and not on the committee. I think hopefully this document says that we intend to be discussing things like goals in more detail, in addition to all the other things. So I really like how this is laid out right now, Travis, because it's not only an outline, but it's also telling the public, these are the things that we intend to dig into and create some answers around. So
Brian, can I add one thought on this one that I brought it up in the last meeting. I just kept sort of stewing on it after the meeting. And then after doing some of the homework, I consistently saw more and more benchmarking facts from other communities, that you can find through scorecards, and some published very recently within the last month or two. So I'm still not clear in the work plan. I feel like it's important. Dave alluded to this too in the last meeting, that who do we benchmark to? And we have to be wise and cautious about that, you know, resembling certain communities more than others. Size matters, you know, demographics matter. And so that thought keeps coming up in my mind. And I'm not sure that I understand where that's at in this document yet, that a fair amount of time should be given up front to what is a good set of benchmarks. And I think even the last report out in 2010 did spend a fair amount of time educating on other types of communities, large and medium sized, that looked and felt maybe similar to Holland in a lot of ways. I'm not sure quite how that's captured in this yet, but I do feel like a fair amount of time could be put toward that as we evolve the project.
And I would say, Boyd, it's going to be part of section 3, where it's Holland community, our landscape. And it's asking questions like who and what we are as a city, defining the percentage of commercial, industrial, residential, transportation, et cetera. What is our service population? You know, if you don't break down that stuff, then you don't know who to benchmark yourself against. So
Right.
once we identify those things and get that in writing, then I think you could start to benchmark other places. And if I'm not mistaken, and Keith, you maybe can clarify this, but I believe that Joe, who is doing sustainability work for the city, is working on helping create a new benchmark kind of landscape for the city. Is that correct, Keith?
Yeah, in fact, Dave and I have been talking about that too, and you'll see that we haven't added that substance in here yet. But we have some thoughts and want to continue to have the discussion with the SDT committee as to some ideas. And I think part of it is like numbers, maybe Dave and Ann and their crew will do. And then another is, I think we have a great resource in Joe from the ODC. That's part of Travis's team. That's part of that contract that the city has in place now, so that we can use some of our other partners, the ICLEs, the Sustainability Directors Network, that we can exchange information, find out about what other communities have as their facts, if you would, as you talk to, Boyd, but that we can also unpack a little bit what other programs are in place in across the nation and the world, for that matter, potentially, and take a look at, you know, picking and at least creating that information for this team to take a look at.
That
So,
helps a ton.
a lot of work to be done yet there, but yep, still to be built out.
I get it. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yep, that makes me clears my head a little bit. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great, Boyd. I love how you're thinking about that. The other, as this conversation is playing out, I think the other people worth talking to is the other groups in town that benchmark our community for other reasons. I think would be, you know, like I know Lakeshore Advantage and the Chamber are looking at specific communities that they feel like they're competing with. I'm sure that people at the I don't know, whoever's in charge of attracting like retirees to move to Holland versus Grand Haven or Saugatuck, you know, like those folks are probably benchmarking against specific communities. So doing all of our research with sustainability as a filter, I think is great. It would also be nice to just overlay that with the other folks in town as they benchmark, you know, like what industries do we have in town and what other towns are they competing with, right? Like, I think those are all parts of the, you know, how we have to be thinking about it if we're thinking about it holistically.
Yep.
Any other comments or questions or omissions that you've seen from this document that Travis updated?
Yeah, I would say where it says the Holland Community Energy Plan strategic goals, I think Don alluded to this, we need to have an overall goal. I think we have a lot of information, but you kind of need a goal to first, and then everything falls beneath it. And that's his second green little headline underneath it. Travis has here. What is the overall final goal of CEP? What's the point of all this? And everything would follow from that goal, whether it's getting information from organizations, the benchmarking, or having different people in from the community, whether from an organization or just residents. I think we do need a goal, and I think it can be referenced from one of I think it was PJ's comments, one of the maybe the second meeting, saying this community energy plan is kind of different from the first update in that things have changed a lot since 2012, from then to now. And what are those changes? And that, I think, will inform our goals.
Yeah, I'm personally, and other people, I'd love to hear where they're coming from. I'm personally, I feel a little handicapped to feel like I have a definitive opinion on changing the goal right now. I hope to learn more about a bunch of things with an eye towards then making a recommendation to change the goal. It feels a little arbitrary to pick a random number at a random time of year right now, but I think we might be in that spot in a few months from now. That's just how I operate, is I like to learn more about the details. You know, Mayor Bach said, you know, he wants us to be aggressive, but it's achievable. And, you know, those are two, those aren't necessarily the same thing. And so that's just how I process, is it would be hard for me to just want to do a different goal right now versus after we've gone through a little bit more of the learnings. But I'm curious what other people think about what Nikki had to say.
Brian, this is Tim. You know, our ultimate throughput as a committee will be in recommendations of goals, plural. Won't be, you know, there might be one that's a great big number or something that everybody will go on. But I think we're early in the process. We know that 10 years ago, a goal of 10 metric tons of CO2 by 2050 was the goal, and is the current goal for the community. What, as I understand it, we are charged with the responsibility of reviewing, assessing, learning, and then coming and making recommendations to the council based upon the information that we have been able to gather, and also determination of those things that are achievable relative to the size community that we are. So to me, we have to get to the ultimate goal. I think we're early in the process because we need to learn more as a committee so that we in turn can say, okay, what's the cost of doing that particular or implementing that particular strategy? And also, what's the timeline? You know, is it something, as somebody said earlier, big ship, little rudder? Do we have to start turning the rudder now for something that's going to be achieved in 3 years or 10 years type thing? So to me, we have a lot more to learn to be able to quantify realistic and achievable goals that the community can wrap their arms around, and also how we're going to be able to obviously fund that.
So you're saying our goal now is actually just to learn?
Well, the interim as a committee, yes, Nick, I would say we need to learn and update ourselves as much as possible. But part of that process is beginning to break out the different pieces, of which Dave has supplied a whole bunch of information that what are the current initiatives, how are they defined, how are they quantified, et cetera. And part of our process is A, to absorb that, and B, to see are there other things that we wish for the community to explore and or implement as part of the goal. So that's, I still have a lot more learning to do on where are there the opportunity. Number one, where are we on a particular thing, and where are there opportunities relative to that in reduction of our carbon footprint?
Yeah, it would be nice to, yeah, so we are learning, and it would be nice to have information on energy use in town too, from the different places.
Mm-hmm.
There's schools or these organizations or different homes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Dave, I believe we do have a breakout by sector, do we not?
Yeah, actually, yeah, if you're interested, I actually have something I can pull up, because I know that committee has asked, and specifically you, Tim, have asked a couple of times. Becky, if you yield the control, I can do something in a minute. But again, I don't want to stop the conversation.
Sure.
But we do have by fuel source and by sector. And so let me just.
Dave, were you planning on bringing that up later when you go through the opportunity matrix, or
not really? It was a separate document, but you know, again, I can hold on that. It just, you know, we do have some information, and I can share it at any time.
We should keep it more broad still.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes.
Let's let the committee continue to have some dialogue on that.
Yeah, yeah, maybe put a quick pin in it. I'm interested in hearing if other people.
Yep.
And Nikki, you tell me if I'm translating what you're sort of lifting up here. If I'm translating it wrong. What I'm hearing from you is you'd like us to have a big, like a headline goal conversation and maybe decision now versus in a few months after we've learned more stuff. Is that what I'm hearing from you? Is you'd like to make a goal now and then do the learning, or am I translating wrong?
Yeah, I guess that would be true because the science has changed. I mean, I'm following some of our conversation over the last few weeks. The science of climate has changed, and as a governmental body, we can have a place in making a decision how big a part we want to be of that. Do we want to make that effort? Holland has been amazing, and we've been a model for other communities, and we know that. How far do we want to go in that? Do we continue and just keep adding on, or do we want to say, let's make it work? So yes, I kind of feel a goal now, if that's the way I would do it. And I think all this, we have a lot of information. I'd like to hear from other people in the community. And as I said, there are some, as Jeff knows, there are people at Hope College who can help. There are people, you've mentioned the Lakeshore Advantage, some people from other areas. The Alice group was mentioned, and how they're affected. You know, there's so many areas that are affected, whether it's transportation. You had Mika Weiss come in, and I just think there's a goal. We know the situation is dire, and what's our role in it? That being said, we are gathering information. We don't know what's possible in our community, but I think it helps to think big, and it helps to be part of something that is truly necessary.
That makes sense. That's good clarification. Are there other folks who wanted to chime in on the goals and maybe I think what Tim was saying is, looking at all the goals are on the table for him. He'd just like to do some of the information gathering first. And I think Nikki's maybe suggesting we talk about the goals first. And so are there other folks that have opinions on sort of the order which we do that?
Yeah, Brian and group, I certainly do. My understanding of our group, and when I think of what we're going to do in the next period of time, whether it be 6, 12, 18 months,
Yeah. Well, hey,
really,
just want to get your opinion now.
Scott. There you go.
Mute.
All right, go ahead. Try again, PJ.
oh, okay, yeah, thank I forget my preamble here.
Jump right in. Give it to us.
Can't just say it. I have to set it up.
Who knew you'd have a heckler?
We know you're thoughtful, buddy. Just give it to us.
I'll sit down.
I think where we're going for the city is an ultimate optimization exercise. And thinking back to how like an economist would do this, there are multiple factors involved here. Certainly the CO2 levels, very clearly an important, vital part of this thing. But again, looking back at the previous work and how this was introduced to us, there are multiple factors involved here. I think what the city has asked is for us to come up with strategic suggestions for good city policy. And I think that going after a goal for one purpose without considering other important factors as well, we would not be doing what we were assigned to do. I mean, by the end of, here we are on Monday, by Friday, we could declare this good and just say, hey, the goal is 10 by 30 and whatever it takes. And then maybe even come up with a list of things that could get us there. I don't think that's what we've been asked to do here.
And just to riff off that a little bit, PJ, I think that might not be aggressive enough. Like that's on the table for me, is like, I'm trying to be as open-minded about all of this as possible. And that's why I felt like there's a lot to learn before I could feel confident in an opinion. So anyways, PJ, I appreciate that. Other comments from the committee based on, just the process in which we want to have, learnings versus goals and in what order?
Yeah, I guess for me, Nick, I think I was where you were a few weeks ago. And then the more I've dug in and the more I read the last community energy plan and got myself up to speed. It took a considerable amount of time to get into the documents that we have now. I find myself, it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm still peeling pages, And so for me, the realization happened that, the city has a goal right now. And it started to become more and more clear, the multivariate, complexity of this crazy regression thing we're looking at. We have a goal, and I don't feel I'm nearly at a place to, like Brian said, he does this more for a living. He's more absorbed in this. He feels like maybe, 10 by 30 isn't aggressive enough. I can't make that statement. I have thoughts of, if we're too aggressive, it's not achievable. Are we really at a place with like communities with this much of an industrial base and this kind of an employment base where we want to keep attracting and globally competing, so I'm not at a place where I feel even close to being able to say whether the goal is too aggressive, not aggressive enough, or are we just fine now? Still in very much a learning phase. And so for me, as long as we understand that our goal is to challenge and assess the status quo, I'm pretty comfortable with that feeling right now.
Thanks, Boyd.
Brian, could I just one more thing?
Sure, yeah.
Again, what we're working on is a community energy plan. I don't understand it to be a community ecology plan or a community sustainability plan, although those things are critically important. This plan has to, as an energy plan, be thinking about the real provision of energy to the needs of our community. And that would be, and energy, as we all know, is a very complicated, sometimes expensive, but a crucial part of where we're, of our city's wherewithal. When you think of things, I mean, you start studying, reading things like energy density and all these other things, and realize that part of our well-being is providing, sufficient, efficient, and affordable energy. Those are important factors. And again, I think that just focusing in on the one ecology part of the goal would be us shortchanging our effort here.
Thanks, PJ. Travis, Jeff, or Scott, you guys want to chime in, or anything to add or to support that's been said already?
I guess I can chime in a little bit. I kind of feel like, I think we definitely will need to spend a pretty significant amount of time dealing with some of the issues, both like what Nikki is talking about, kind of the higher level stuff, like how ambitious do we have to be? But I think, the reality is, I think until we have some basic understanding of what the different pathways to anything are, what some of these different technologies are, I think, right, the ultimate, as PJ said, right, like one path to 10 megatons by 2030 is doing half as much stuff as what we do now. And that's not a really realistic path. So I think we have to have some idea of the technical ways that we can get to whatever path we decide, whatever goal we decide, before we start to kind of plot exactly that goal. But I would definitely encourage us to spend a pretty significant amount of time dealing with like questions like what PJ said, like what level of investment do we have to make some of these things happen and still be able to supply energy to the community? What are the impacts of global warming and climate change, and how fast, like what is our actual carbon budget? How fast do we need to get to zero? Do we need to get negative? And I think also, I guess one of the things that I've been thinking about quite a bit is, right, we're plotting this kind of as a longer term, 2040, but also beyond that. Right. And I think just generally, I think one of the things that we have to come to grips with, I think, is like the climate stuff is not going to change, right? Like that's not going to become less important as we continue on in the future, both like from a, kind of a lived reality, but also from a policy and political standpoint. So I think we have to be careful. Like you don't want to chart a path to 10 megatons and get stuck there. And then 10 years from now go, wait, we should have really been shooting for zero. And we just pigeonholed ourselves with a lot of investment to get us to 10 when it would have been wiser to shoot for zero, because we know we're going to have to get there eventually anyway.
Oh, that's literally what we're doing right now, buddy.
Oh, I know.
We set a goal for 10 and everybody's like, it should have been zero.
I know.
Hopefully we won't do it again.
But I guess that's the thing that I worry, like, you don't want to make investments to get to 10. Like, the reality is that the 10 is not a long-term goal that's actually going to, like, we're not going to come in 2030 and come back and review this and say, well, yep, 10 that was a great goal. That's a good end goal where we can stop there.
Right.
So I think by thinking longer term than even maybe 2040, I think we do have to be thinking about how do we make investments now that, right, to steer the ship so that we're where we want to be eventually.
Yeah. Yep. Travis or Scott, you guys want to chime in here? You feel good?
No, I would just say, I guess I kind of agree with what I'm hearing everybody say personally. And, I always, when you enter into planning processes, structure tends to follow strategy, right? So we need to build our strategy so that we can get to the structural standpoint of where we want to be at. So, and I think you've got to, I would be hard it'd be hard for me to just pick a number unless you just wanted to call it 0. If that's what everybody wants to hear, you can call it 0, but you're going to have to build a plan to get to 0. So whether you build a plan by having a bunch of conversations and learning and being really informed and being able to make your decisions, as you come to those conclusions, or whether you just want to call out a number and then just throw a bunch of things at it and then hopefully we can get there. I think that's the concern I would have with just setting a goal without being able to like logically say in this amount of time doing these things, we can get to this number. So, and I think that's an important part of this process, because I think just calling a number out and then saying, now we're going to get to that number, but not knowing how you're going to get to that number is just as dangerous as not calling out a number right now. So.
Thanks, Travis.
But ultimately we need to, I completely agree with Jeff. Ultimately, we're going to have to wrestle with all that and get there. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like how Boyd put it. Our job, so to speak, is to challenge and assess the goal. And that's sort of the, I think that the big goal, Nikki, to me, the big goal is talked about every single time we're talking about any of this stuff. It's all on the table, right? And as these learnings happen, they inform how aggressive we think we should make a recommendation. That's again, just how I'm thinking about it. Scott, we haven't heard from you, and you might have been on a phone call or might be on a phone call. You got a nice blue tie on in that still frame though. All right, we'll assume he's on a phone call. Okay. So Nikki, I just don't want you to feel like we don't care about the goal. I think everybody thinks the goal is on the table in terms of the conversation. It's just, I think a finance guy, multiple engineers, a business person, I think we just want to learn more of the detail first before we talk about it.
Good. It's been a good discussion.
Okay. All right. That's great. Thanks for bringing it up. I really appreciate it. It's important that people know that this is on all of our minds.
Brian, I guess I'd like to add one other quick thing and then you move on. But
sure. I
think it's really important that we understand and we learn some things, because we talk about Alice population. We talk about a lot of different things. We could have a very negative impact on Alice population by making certain decisions, or we could have a very positive impact. The same thing's true for business, the same, so I believe that we need to make sure we're informed in what we do, and that really needs to drive the decisions that we make. So, and I think if somebody really wants to see a number, it would be really easy for this group to say, we're aiming for 0, but we may not get 0. The end game might be 5, 8, 6, whatever, right? But you can always aim for a target, but we'll have to figure out what that is based on all those different factors we're talking about.
Yeah, well said. Thanks, Travis. So circling back to the agenda, unless there's any other commentary on the framework, that was good discussion.
The only thing I want to bring up real quick, Brian, is, I think if there's anything there, and Keith and I were chatting a little bit about maybe some of that historical context, just want to be able to we want to get kind of a green light to start populating draft language in various sections once the committee is comfortable kind of from an outline perspective. And obviously there's a lot there on future strategy, future goals. That's going to be kind of off limits for populating until a lot more discussion happens, but at least some of the historical context narrative, we might be able to start, getting some draft language in there if the committee is comfortable with that. But we wanted to make sure that we're getting that direction from the committee before starting in that down that road.
Yeah, speaking on behalf of myself and not the committee, if you've got any background historical information, I say put it in there, and then at the next meeting or at future meetings, we can ask questions about it, get clarifications, anything that you guys feel like you want to take a swipe at putting in there, I think is great. And then we can react to it. That's my sense. If others think differently, speak up.
Agreed. I feel comfortable that that structure is going to help unearth an awful lot of clarity.
I agree. I would fill in as much as you guys know. We can always change it. So if you need to put draft in big letters across it or whatever, do that. But I think filling it in gives us something to respond to.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. The glossary of terms, again, something that's going to be in the agenda every meeting.
Yeah, Brian, and maybe I can just let you know, I think again, I haven't gone through this in great detail yet, I will admit, but I think what Cinca did is she basically took exactly what was in the original Garforth Community Energy Plan from several years ago now, converted it to a different format, but then so that you and Dave and I, by extension of you giving us direction, can start maybe changing some definitions where we think maybe we should update or change a definition and add new definitions. So you'll see us doing work on this document too, which ultimately would be an appendix or a chapter or a section in the final draft working report.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's been a couple of ads. I think Cinca's picking up on some of the dialogue of meeting minutes or other presentations where there's some things that are coming through, because if you go down, I'm sure if it's still highlighted in this particular case, but there's a combined cycle, for example. Becky, if you go back up to C, yeah, combined cycle. Yeah, so it's not highlighted. You can't tell. I don't think it was updated unless my pictures of everybody are kind of over the no. So that one is new. You know, for example, there's some others that are in here that have been updated. But again, as you go through here as well, if there's anything that you see is maybe outdated or want to recommend, you know, we dig into a little bit more information as staff to try to give some clarity to those terms, you know, let us know. But there's probably about 4 or 5, I think, on here that I added, or, you know, that was recommended be added over the last couple weeks.
Okay.
I found this to be very helpful. And I know it looks like from some that I shot back to Cinca, she got them in there too. So just really helps looking through the PowerPoints and other things like that to refer to this.
Oh, great, Boyd. That came from you. That's excellent. Okay, thank you for that. And yeah, I know I tried to give definition to the ones that were new on the list.
From a process standpoint, as people are reviewing this on their own, is the best idea to have people shoot notes directly to Cinca, or do we want to like mention it here in the meeting? Like, for instance, and I have not gone through this with a fine tooth comb, but for instance, like RECS, RECS, which is on page 5. I don't know what that definition is, but I don't think it's the RECS that we're trying to talk about.
Right. I think it may have been what we were talking about back in 2010, but it isn't today, at least in the context of a renewable energy credit, which is another term that RECS. So I tell you, hang around this industry long enough and acronyms get recycled into a lot of different uses.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Anyways, so should we just shoot all those notes to Cinca directly?
Yeah, either directly to Cinca, Keith, Dave, either way. I don't want to say don't have the conversations here in the meeting. If there's something that's really important, do that. But I think it probably is best use of everyone's time to just do that via email in the background, just individual member to Keith, Dave, or Cinca.
Okay. And I need to pull a work from home moment and help my wife for a second because, you know, I'm working from home and we have a sick kid. So I'll be back in 2 minutes. Travis, if you want to pick up the baton and start people talking about the survey results, that would be awesome.
Okay, so we'll move on then to the number 6, which is the attachment compiled survey results. That's getting opened up here. So I guess I'm wondering if Keith and Dave, do you have anything you want to share that you saw as you guys had this put together, or have you looked at it? Is there any insight?
Yeah, I think both of us have taken a look through here. You know, what we try to do is display it in a way where you could see kind of, you know, where the comment was coming from. So if we wanted to pick up on some dialogue and try to explore, you know, what somebody was thinking in a particular area, but you know, as a staff, we haven't really, I think, tried to put any general commentary to it. I think you can see that there's some things that emerge as I would say items that need some more exploration, or there's more interest in exploration more than others on here. But you know, hopefully that's something that you're able to glean pretty quickly by scanning through here.
I had a quick clarifying question. Sorry, I'm back. Some of these answers don't have some of our initials. Is that because some people just didn't fill out every single question, which is totally fine. I just want to make sure that you guys weren't omitting something for another reason that I wasn't sure of.
I think everything's on there that we got back. I think, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some people probably just didn't have an opinion about a particular area, or weren't in a position to be able to offer that opinion.
No, I didn't even see it was on such a, on my screen showed, I didn't even see the far right stuff. First I saved, and then I didn't see this. So I'm sorry, I wrote in stuff on the bottom, but not this stuff. So
you're talking, yeah, I noticed that, Nikki. You had comments more on some of the items further down the list. So yeah, okay.
I just did, and so I'm sorry. So I can do that, but
oh yeah, you're fine. Formatting issues. Tell you what, how much gets lost in translation on formatting documents?
And I want to make sure that I understand your question, your comment, Brian. I think what's here is that on the far left column is the initials of the committee member, which then holds all the way through the columns left to right.
I think his comment, Keith, is that not all 8
not
show
everyone
up.
Commented on every single line item. Yeah,
correct.
I captured everything that people submitted.
Right.
Correct. So yeah, so like on just in the top one, like utility scale solar, I don't see anything from Nikki, and what I'm asking, and it's okay if she didn't put anything on that one, that's fine. I just want to make sure that that's what happened and not you guys didn't add it for some other reason that I'm unaware of. Okay. All right. So I guess one thing is, as people, and coming off the holiday weekend, I'm assuming not everybody did a deep dive into this, but I think one thing that's a good takeaway for us is to review this and make sure that your answers were represented accurately and fully, just because, you know, copy and paste and people were, you know, Cinca was getting feedback from lots of people, and errors, you know, honest errors can happen. So just make sure that what you tried to convey is in here. And then also obviously take the time to read where other people were coming from. I think is a good thing to do, just to get I took a brief look at it. I didn't do a deep dive, but my initial takeaway was there's a variety of opinions on what we think is important. And so that's good and healthy. And then there are some things where we all are like, yeah, that seems like something we all want to dig into. So it's just good, I think, to go through and get a sense of where people were coming from. The other thing that I thought was sort of interesting is I think And especially if you don't live in this world every day, you can get these things confused, or maybe it was the formatting of the survey. But I would see some folks have in the questions, there'd be like a question about, can we do solar for buildings? And it would be in the utility scale solar, bucket, or it would be a building comment on a comment, in a place that wasn't really tied to buildings. And so that would be the other thing as you reread it, just to make sure that your ideas around things or questions around things are just in the right sort of categories. Because utility scale solar, versus the BPW investing in a solar community solar array in some other community is different than the BPW investing in a solar array here in Holland, which is different than a business putting a solar panel on its building, which is different than a person putting a solar panel on their home, right? Like those are all distinct sort of opportunities and categories. And again, just because this is a lot of information, I think some folks were mixing and matching them, honestly, but maybe a little bit off in some of those regards. So those are some of my, at least high level comments. Anybody else have anything that they took away from this?
Brian, Tim, some of the ones that are, the subject matters, BPW already has done some work in evaluating, for example, solar, and where does it, number one, where is it best? Obviously, where there's lots of sun. But number two is when is it? I think Dave, you've got the graph that will show the time period that solar, not only time period of day, but time period of year, where the solar array will be most productive. But then, so there's that kind of background information that is already available, but hasn't necessarily been disseminated to this group. And there are other, and the question of, local solar versus remote. And Brian, to your point, all the way from a solar array to one that's far away, one that's local, one that's on top of a factory building, one that's on top of a house. I think we have data already available on that. Do we not, Dave?
Yeah, we have cost information, we have production information. I mean, each one of those involves different ownership structures, different scale, different land use considerations, different rate policy issues. I mean, I think the intent of this survey really is to find out where the interest level lies, and then we can dive deeper into those, both from a little bit more explanation of what it is, what the potential is in terms of opportunities, what kind of policy issues are there. I mean, that's kind of, I think, why we're starting this. But yeah, on solar, there's a lot of information that we have, and a lot of information that probably other sources have too, that could be presented to the SDT.
Dave, would now be a good time for you to jump into that sector breakdown, and then that could bridge us to the updated opportunity matrix that you have, and then we all can.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, the other thing is, if you feel like you want to gather some more general feedback from the survey, I mean, that's fine too. I don't want to stop that, because I do think, ultimately, if you look at the bottom of this agenda today, you could see that we kind of have, as time allows here, we talked about going into the integrated resource plan, which I'm not suggesting we do at this point. But there's some information in there, for example, regarding solar. As a staff, we want to know, like populating future meetings with information that's going to help you. We want to know where that prioritization is. So if the survey is a means to that end, then I want to make sure that you have enough time in the meeting to be able to create that prioritization. But if you feel like everybody just kind of needs to think and let it marinate a little bit more and address that next meeting, then that's fine. We can certainly move into the other areas.
I'm happy to be overruled here. My sense is you developed that opportunity matrix. We did this sort of like, blind first blush. What are our questions and how important we think different things are relative to the survey, which I think was a good discipline for everybody to just take some time and be thinking about these things and thinking about questions they might have. And now I think if you're going to dig in a little bit more on the more robust opportunity matrix that you started to show us last time, I think that will inform and sort of give context to maybe some of our own survey results. We may have different opinions on certain things. They might go from I'm sort of interested to I'm very interested based on your more detailed opportunity matrix. So unless people want to spend more time on these survey results, I think it's a good iterative process for us to have done the first shot on our own, gotten more feedback from you, and then we can fine tune this thing.
I would just add to that, Brian, that I think for me, and I would love to hear if everybody feels this way or not, but for me, I think the next step should be for Dave and Keith as staff, and whoever else they want to bring into that process, would be to go through that survey, which is a lot of pages of response, and boil it down to what are like those top 5 or 10 questions or whatever that we asked, so that we can see we got to get to the bottom of the funnel on that thing. And right now it's like you're at the top of it and there's a lot of stuff there. So how do we get to the point where we can go, hey, the group clearly asked to learn more about solar. The group clearly asked to learn more about, this, and this. And these are the 5 like lesson plans that Dave and Keith need to put together to share back with our group, whether that's bringing in a speaker or whether that's them or whoever, so that we can get more informed and get those questions answered. And I think that's the next step for that survey piece, because we've given that feedback. Now we want to get educated on the things that we ask questions about.
Yeah, I'm with you, Travis. That's what I was hoping would happen, because my gut was for much of that, it's going to be, oh, no, we've got a presentation on the shelf that'll handle, it looks like 90+% of the group's questions. We just need to spend some time going through that thing. And if a question or two isn't answered precisely in that in your presentation, it'll come out through just basic Q&A. So that was my hope as well, whether it's on the legal front, and we need to have Ron come in around permitting and things like that, or whether it's Dave on, utility technologies and stuff. So that was my hope too.
Yeah, I think that's great, Travis. I personally started to build a little matrix I was scoring the answers 5 to 1. Absolutely, we need to talk about it. 1, not a big, it's a waste of time. And then I was creating like a matrix around averages, and then also like the range of the spectrum of answers. That was just, I was asking the same things and trying to, anyways, I didn't get all the way done with it. But if Keith and Dave or other people want to do that, I think that'll be how we learn, like, what are the themes of what's most important. And I also think it'll be good to spend at least a couple minutes talking about the ones that on the average are not most important, but maybe there's a wide spectrum of opinion within the committee. Like if one person on the committee thinks wind, utility scale wind is a huge deal, and someone else thinks it's a total waste of time, I think it's respectful to both of those opinions that we probably spend a couple of minutes digging into that at some point. Just because if it were me and I'm passionate about something, I'd like at least a couple of minutes of like hearing why we're not going to talk about it. So that's the other layer I felt like was, worth some time at some point. Obviously, coming off of Thanksgiving, we don't have all of that mapped out right now.
Well, I think Keith and I can spend time on the survey results and try to give some feedback to the group. I think you're right. I mean, there'll be probably changing opinions as we provide more information. But certainly we can take a shot at summarizing the feedback so far. And I think the other thing is, Nikki, now that you see the
and it fits on my screen now too.
Yeah. No, yeah. So you could pull it up again at some point here out of the agenda whenever, but I'm just saying, if you have other comments on the topics that were not on the survey, I think you could still get them to us.
Okay.
For the ones you didn't comment on, we'll try to get that into the mix.
But I will do that tonight. Thanks.
But I would just say, like, to Dave and Keith and Brian, you obviously, I'm not trying to take away the task of you processing all that information, because I know that's something you want to do. But if we could get that down to where they could become agenda items, right? Like each time we have a meeting, we could tackle one of them or something, depending on how it lays out. That would help build that agenda for us going forward.
Well, and that's why I think when you look at this again, I'm going to go to the opportunity matrix in a moment, Travis. But one thing to keep in mind is that that opportunity matrix sort of starts at a fairly high level, where you look at levers, that can be pulled to move things in the community's carbon footprint direction. And so I'm going to ask Becky to give me control here in a minute, because I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet rather than the document that's attached. But for example, electric portfolio is one of those levers. And so the presentation really in looking at the integrated resource plan addresses the entirety of the electric portfolio. So it really kind of gives you a chance to ask those questions and wrestle with more than just utility scale solar, but wind and other resources as well. So it kind of gives you that. And when we get to, building energy consumption, there's a lot of potential strategies that the opportunity matrix has identified that you've talked about in your survey response, but they all fit into this concept of building consumption. So, I mean, I think the topic level might be at that lever level, when you look at electric portfolio, building consumption, all these different levers. That's where the staff maybe can give you a presentation that kind of dives more deeply into those things at the lever level. And then you can give us feedback or questions, or say, hey, I want to hear more about that particular topic from a subject matter expert or whatever it might be. So just food for thought on that. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here, pull up the matrix. And I think if you're looking at it right now, you're seeing opportunity matrix in the upper left-hand corner. Is everybody seeing that?
Yep.
Okay. So again, just real quickly before we move through this in a little bit more detail, the big levers here, for example, are right here. So when you look at electric portfolio changes as one of the levers, if we move down, you can see building consumption reductions. The transportation, and again, that's a big topic, as was talked about through public comment. It's not just about EVs; it's about the entire mobility discussion. Really, it's bigger than just that. And then this concept of offsets, which has been embodied in a lot of other community plans that have an effort of going beyond maybe a certain fixed number down to zero. You'll see offsets show up in those, and so that's a topic. And what's not on this list, but we added later, was the concept of education being an important lever as well. That awareness drives action. And I think, to Don's point earlier in terms of engaging people, and people are part of this, big part of this equation, because ultimately a lot of these things, when you get outside the electric portfolio or outside of offsets being purchased, they become behavioral decisions, behavior decisions that are either incentivized or are mandated, one way or the other. And so as we look through here and, take each of these levers, you can see that under the electric portfolio, kind of split it up into this ownership question here of, things that are owned by the utility. And then, within that, there can be things that are very large scales. We call them central plant, things that are kind of, you build a big resource in an area, in a centralized area, or things that are distributed around, smaller, move around, and they have different costs and different benefits associated with each of those. There's a lot more scale involved with central plant, but there might be reliability enhancements as well as helping to interface with customer needs by building distributed resources. And outside of utility owned, then you get into customer owned. And this concept of customers that at a corporate level put solar on their roof or in their yard, or on a residential level put solar on their roof or in their yard. Or perhaps a customer that wants to have both power and heat, developing something that is on their facility or at their facility. So again, that's how we break up the lever, or we have proposed breaking up the lever of electric portfolio. I'll go into a little bit more from the time horizons in a little bit, but again, that's that category. In building consumptions, it's been really kind of broken up, again, based upon this behavioral change, where we look at things that are incentivized versus things that are mandated. And under the incentivized, we have efficiency investments. So this is where a customer needs to make or wants to make an investment in something that's going to improve the efficiency of their process or of their building. But there's somebody that comes alongside of them and provides some incentive for them to do that. We have that happening at the BPW through the Energy Waste Reduction Program. SEMCO does that through their Energy Waste Reduction Program. And Holland Energy Fund does that through the Home Energy Retrofit Program as well. Those are examples of incentives that are there. There could be incentives that are given to move a customer in a direction of having an alternate energy source, like electrification. Now, you'll see this right now under our electric vehicle area, under the transportation section, but electrification can be incentivized potentially for other things right now that burn fuel. In a home or in a business, there can be a move towards a heat pump from a gas furnace, for example, or maybe other things that are using fuels that can be electrified. So that's another potential incentive. And then the concept of district energy, where instead of using, again, a furnace, and maybe you're not creating an electric source directly, but moving a thermal source around a community, and again, incentivizing a customer to choose it versus another source of energy. So that's what's spelled out there. Another way of incentivizing is giving financing alternatives. So even if we aren't giving a boost to an efficiency improvement that's being made, sometimes customers have a barrier to financing something. If it's a homeowner, maybe they don't have a credit score or haven't been owning a building long enough to be able to qualify for a traditional financing alternative. So on-bill financing is an example that we have in the community of a financing alternative. Another thing that's been discussed on a commercial level is PACE, or property assessed financing, essentially, where you have an energy efficiency measure in a commercial building financed. And those can provide reduction of barriers that might otherwise be there in terms of access to capital. So again, those are things that are incentivized examples, not meant to be an exhaustive list, but things that we've identified, at least on the first go around here, of some things. Under the mandate section, and again, because these are listed does not mean that they're available. I want to put that out there, and I know Keith would want me to say that because, for example, building codes, we have to follow the state in the city of Holland. So the state of Michigan adopts a building code, and then all jurisdictions have to follow that. It doesn't mean that in the future there might not be opportunities to adopt something, if the state allows it, to be more restrictive. And that, if we did that in the city of Holland, those would kind of fall into the category of mandates at that point, because now you're putting a restriction in a geographic area or in a jurisdiction that says, if you build something here, you're going to build it to this standard. And so that's the concept there. Another area of mandate that is considered here is one where the city has licensing purview. And in one of the areas is, for example, rental properties. Again, this will take some exploration in terms of the legal aspects of it, but it would also be something where you'd have to consider the fact that there may be financial ramifications potentially. But we do know that in non-owner occupied dwellings, if you look at in general, they have some of the highest energy use per square foot. And they also have people that are often at that ALICE level who would maybe be struggling to pay. And so when you look at energy being a big part of their bill, the landlord isn't necessarily incentivized to lower that if the tenant is the person who is paying for the energy bill. The landlord's interest is in occupancy, and certainly energy efficiency improvements that allow them to market their property and to get that occupancy rate up are reasons why they would do that. But that's not always the case. If there's no problem with occupancy, then you have a harder time getting the attention of the landlord. So could you mandate it through licensing update? That's the concept here that's discussed. Further down the list, you look at business licensing. Again, the city of Holland has some say-so in terms of who gets licensed in terms of businesses. What kind of teeth could be put into that business licensing process as it relates to energy performance? Whether it's awareness in terms of having a business owner have to get their business performance assessed, or whether there's some improvements that are there. Again, these are all examples of mandates. Another example of a mandate would be time of transfer disclosures, where a homeowner is required to make certain things available to the buyer. Doesn't necessarily mandate updates in terms of this, but it does mandate some level of disclosure, which again could force a little bit of a marketing situation here, where the homeowner would want to make their energy score obviously as attractive as possible to assist in that sale. And then the other, in terms of mandate, you had the incentive in terms of electrification. Another way of looking at that would be mandates. Some communities in the United States, and again, this varies probably based upon building code and what authority is given to the city. Some have chosen an approach of mandating only electric sources for various uses of energy in homes going forward. So this is an example of that here, just pointing that out as a category. In the transportation sector, first we start very broad by looking at mobility as a general topic, which is really important. Looking at how can we, it's kind of like building envelope in a way. The current energy plan, it was built in 2010 and adopted by the city. suggested that the loading order is one where you don't use the energy if you don't need it, first and foremost. Second, you look at the building envelope and you look at improving the energy efficiency of the structure before you start looking at the source of energy. Looking at making it a more efficient furnace, for example, or worrying about whether there's a solar panel on the roof. First, deal with the structure. Under transportation, I think the same can be said. The concept here is looking at mobility first and saying, what's inherent about our mobility systems in the community that can be addressed before we worry about the efficiency of the vehicles that are moving people around. And so that's the concept that's discussed here. So obviously that's a big topic in of itself, but then elements of it include the public transportation piece and this concept of the last mile options. And I think it was pointed out during the public comment period again, this transit discussion between Grand Rapids and Holland is influenced and affected by how effective the last mile options are in Holland. And the success rate is going to be influenced by that. So that's an area under the big lever of transportation, along with electrification shows up here. And again, this could be mandated or incentivized. The mandated piece would require some exploration from a legal standpoint, but we already are doing some level of incentivizing through EV chargers and homes and time of use rates at the BPW today. But again, that could be looked at on a broader scale. You get down to offsets, and again, what we're talking about here are things that are invested elsewhere, outside of Holland, which further bring down the carbon emissions on a global scale, and that Holland can take credit for so that it reduces its net emissions further. And generally, those take some forms of either converting a higher affecting gas for greenhouse gas to a lower affecting gas. For example, methane is a much more potent, nitrous oxide is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So if you can do conversion, you can create offsets. If you can take carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester it in other areas, you can create offsets. If you can absorb it through tree planting, for example, you can create offsets. These are just examples of that are in this opportunity matrix. Again, want to point out before we dig a little bit further, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list. It's meant to be a starter, conversation starter. I was asked, and Keith was asked by the SDT leadership to take a shot at putting some sort of time horizon based approach to these categories of opportunities. Again, this is not meant to be prescriptive in terms of an approach. What it's meant to do is start a conversation among this group. We expect there to be push and pull, add to, move things around as it relates to time horizons, further explore something greater in some of these. But what we try to do is, from Keith and in my perspective, is to take these and say, okay, if we were going to start taking these different categories and look at those both in terms of what's currently happening and what could happen under different time horizons, this is what we've done. And so this next page really deals with that. First of all, currently, it's important to take the leadership group. Travis and Brian wanted us to make sure that we took stock of what's already happening. And if you look at the electric portfolio, we have two largest solar arrays in Michigan being built. Holland's participating with other municipals, and we're going to be receiving about 13.2 megawatts of solar into our portfolio next year, and those arrays are completed. The BPW and the city are electing to go to 100% renewable energy for our offices here this year. And then we also looking at, we already offer a program, but we're looking at promoting the program further to our customers, because we have an elective renewable energy rate where any of our customers, no matter what their class of customer is, they can elect up to 100% renewable for their source of electricity. In building consumption, we have the residential home energy retrofit program and on-bill financing operational. A lot of discussion right now around how to keep that momentum going to further the adoption rate there. But it is a program that we have available to us in the community. And I think that differentiates us against a lot of other communities right now in terms of the relationship with having the BPW and the city. We have recommendations pending, as we've talked about, for commercial and institutional buildings. Discussed, taking that up and moving forward on that. And then one of our tactical actions right now that Ann's group has finished a proposal for is what our energy waste reduction program for electric would look like in 2022. That program would be to replace the mandated program from the state of Michigan. So that is currently underway. In transportation, as I mentioned, we're incentivizing electric vehicles through time of use and through charging station rebates. We have adopted, both the city and the BPW, a policy for alternative fuel vehicles, including electrification of those vehicles. And we have a proposal from Ford Mobility for a stakeholder process to really kind of do a deeper dive on the mobility question and to come up with a series of strategies associated with this larger mobility question, which is, again, something that we've added to the resource documents and posed to this group as being, whether this is something through the SDT this group wants to kind of tackle, or whether this is something, left to more of the tactical action group to follow through on. And then under offsets, I would say candidly that not a lot's happening on a current level at this point. It's not something that we really looked at under the old plan as being an available lever to us. But again, when we look at plans that have zero as a goal on a long term, and even some interim level that's working their way, you often see offsets being part of that equation. And as I mentioned, we added education under the current three-year agreement with Outdoor Discovery Network. And then looking at the fact that we've built the Visitor Education Center at HEP, Holland Energy Park, which was a pre-COVID thing, hard to get, we're not getting, obviously, people through the building right now. But that we anticipate continuing to leverage with the schools and to help build curriculum around energy sustainability, as well as we move forward. So under the 3 to 5 year goals, under the electric portfolio, just kind of starting there, we've talked about the fact that we've got an expiring agreement on wind, where we'd be looking at replacing that with additional solar coming up here in the next couple of years. One possible scenario here is investigating the viability of local solar in the Holland community as a resource, something that we could drive the development of that. We're building an anaerobic digester at the water reclamation facility. So we'll be looking at the fact that we're generating renewable energy from that digester for the site. And then we would look at adopting the renewable energy rate for the remainder of that site as a strategy. And then this concept of what we call performing a value of solar to really inform our distributed energy program in the community. We have customers that build their own generation, and then they receive a certain amount of crediting against their bill for export of that power into our grid. And I think that what's talked about here is making sure that we have a proper valuation of that resource into our portfolio. I'm going to stop right here and see if there are any questions either on the current or on the 3 to 5 year on the electric portfolio, I guess.
I have a question, Dave. Is there a vision or an ability to overlay these things with a best guess on carbon impact and other like high level KPI financial metrics, like mostly carbon impact though? Like if we're chasing, 19 per metric ton, what is the biodigester project worth? That's in motion. Like what is that worth? Is there a vision or ability to have that, or are you about to show us that right now?
Yeah, so what I did is I pulled up the current screen to give you an idea of what we're starting to do here to put the anticipated carbon reduction metrics and the cost metrics together. This screen represents, and this screen is in your packet. I'm going to point out one error that we had as well. The home energy retrofit program had an error in the calculation for the cost per ton. It is significantly lower than what was in your spreadsheet. My apologies for that error. It still is one of the higher cost elements within our groupings here on the current basis. But just to give you a sense, what we've looked at here, and there's some debate I think that could be had. This represents all costs borne by either the BPW or the city. This does not include customer costs. This does not include SEMCO or other entity costs, for example. These are just costs that the BPW is bearing for implementation of these programs. So what we try to do, Brian, to answer your question is give a look at what the incremental annual investment is by either the city and or BPW, what we're seeing in terms of the greenhouse gas reduction in metric tons to get a cost per ton, but then also looking at it in terms of that per capita impact, because ultimately we're trying to drive that number down from the 19 that we're at today. And then to also list some additional benefits and what are the assumptions that go into the equation on the screen. And again, this is not everything that's here is up for debate in terms of the scope and how it's been assumed. And certainly we're, as a staff, want to be responsive to wherever the SDT wants to go as a methodology that we use. So I would just want to explain that that's really what we have at this point. Some things are pretty tough to assume. For example, education. It's hard to know how much we're touching the hearts and minds of people that come through the Visitor Education Center at HEP and what kind of impact that has on behaviors and therefore what kind of impact it has on greenhouse gas reduction. So there hasn't been anything really assumed in some of those areas. But there likely is some, to be had. I think that's what's going to be more difficult when we go forward. If we look at the short term, for example, that hasn't been laid out yet. So as far as like incremental annual cost, we can probably start giving some sense to that, but there's a lot of work that probably needs to be done to try to give some assumptions around how big of an impact some of those are going to have. But I think that's to be expected, right? Because, when we have done these looks in the past, at least the short term, we've tried to give a sense to, and then we've asked the steering committee and the tactical action teams to research it, to create the program design, to pilot it, and then possibly operationalize it based upon what they've learned. And so I think that's probably what's going to happen here. Again, we can speculate. And I think if you look at other community plans, a lot of them have assumptions. Mm-hmm. So, Ann Arbor, for example, if you look at their plan to get to zero, it's full of assumptions in terms of adoption, full of assumptions in terms of policy changes that have to be made, which again, we can do that. We can take a shot at doing that. And as long as we're clear about what those assumptions are, I think we can be honest about then what the expected reductions would be based upon those assumptions.
Yeah, that's good. Dave, I'm going to stop you. I want to hear what other thoughts do people have on what Dave's put together and how he's thinking about this, and what other layers of data would we want to maybe have? I think this is awesome and major steps in a great direction. So let me start with that. But what other comments or questions do people have?
Yeah, Brian, I guess I'm reflecting back on the discussion we had in the beginning of our session today, and looking back at when Mayor Box gave us our team charter that said really what we're supposed to do here is recommend strategy initiatives and 3 to 5 year interim goals. So I think what Dave is presenting us is a lot of substance that we could use as raw material, select some, aggregate some, and to the question you asked just a few minutes ago, can we quantify CO2 output? There's probably the other factors of what we have to consider that we could put questions to analyze all this stuff that Dave has presented as well. It's a pretty good, this is a great start. It's a really good body of stuff that we could probably put together a straw man of our output pretty quickly. But then certainly we're going to have to stress test it a lot. And I think also based on some of the things we heard today, we're going to have to seek input from people in our community and others to make sure we're fulfilling what the mayor wants us to do here.
Dave, in the IRP, when Black and Veatch, pulled together numerous scenarios and plotted them out and had, it looks like, really good underlying depth and research on critical assumptions that move those scenarios. Is that the type of firm that you could picture accelerating us if we were to get in the near future to a point of defining some scenarios, right? Using what you've already built here under the short term and then stacking on and building onto that. A firm like that, can they help us go much more quickly, much more reliably, get a third party input involved, that kind of thing? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we could do as a staff, Boyd, is, for example, if we choose implement the commercial and institutional recommendations, which is here, you see that on the screen, or create a PACE district where we're opening up an opportunity for a different financing opportunity for commercial buildings. We can say 10% of our buildings adopted, and therefore it's going to have this kind of impact on carbon reduction. But that 10% adoption is purely going to be speculative on staff's part, right? Where a firm might be able to help is researching, other PACE districts in the United States and looking at what adoption rate look like for those particular areas.
Sure.
So that's where we might need some help. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have some staff to do some of that legwork, and maybe I'm choosing a wrong example. It might be more difficult when we start looking at taking a position on the state of Michigan's adoption of a building code that would involve having a net zero option adoption for the city of Holland. There, it becomes a pretty tricky evaluation of the impact on carbon versus the impact on development in the city of Holland, because if not every jurisdiction in the state of Michigan adopts the same code, now you have a higher cost development situation in Holland. Same thing with rental properties. It'd be tougher for the staff to say making rental landlords invest in energy efficiency means that they do that, and therefore the rental prices go up $200 a month, and the population in Holland that's seeking affordable housing just got a tougher situation, right? So I don't know what all these, when you pull a lever, it generally has an effect. And that effect is a sustainability effect from a environmental standpoint, may not be a sustainability effect from an economic standpoint. So that's where a firm might be able to come in and help us, because I don't think we can give assumptions all day long, but I don't think any of us in the city staff have the depth to be able to really be able to understand the ramifications of some of these. For example, when you get into mandates, what's going to happen with some of that.
Well, that's, I was drawing on my prior professional experience with GE, right? Where this is what I did for a living, was build out cash scenarios globally. And we brought in Ernst & Young, we brought in brains that, after we identified our levers like you've done, and we had access to internal data, but we needed benchmarking. We needed to work outside of our boundaries as we played with certain assumptions, pinpointing big assumptions that could move things. You need to benchmark outside of your own purview, and bringing in firms is really, really helpful to educate staff also through that process, and inform the process, and the realities. And ultimately maybe get to a quantification or just a no-go. And here's why: it's been tried here and there, and it's a no-go. So when I was reading the IRP and reading these scenarios, all kinds of prior ticks were coming up in my mind from things that I had to do in the past. And now you've added an important piece today, which is showing, the levers in a very logical, organized way. And from there, it gets into, deep diving and trying to frame up, well, what are key scenarios that you start to play with? And then you start stress testing and doing sensitivity analysis, right? To pin down some cases.
Right.
Nikki, did you have your hand raised?
I was going to say, and I see on the education part of it will be important. And David mentioned behavioral changes. You needed incentivization or mandates or whatever. Eventually that'll have to be fleshed out. You have building awareness and trust. You're working with the ODC. Eventually, I know that, and we've had difficulty with whether it's online financing or the retrofit program.
Yep.
How do you get, how do you advertise this stuff? How do you get people to really want it and to know about it and help them? And I know in Grand Rapids, they had that difficulty too. And they actually had to have a person in, not a BPW person, not a city person, but kind of a social worker type person, go into the houses individually. And
Well, I think what you're bringing up, Nikki, and I was on the webinar that I think you were discussing, Ann Arbor and Grand Rapids.
Grand Rapids, yeah.
Both communities started with equity in their discussion of this challenge of energy efficiency in their community, and I think one of the things that one of the reasons they did that, not only to make sure that questions like what was brought up earlier about ALICE populations and others, were really represented and addressed in this, but beyond that, it takes a trusted advisor, and a utility is, as much as we are liked, and I think we are liked by our customer base, is not necessarily the entity that's going to be the first one on people's minds that are going to come in and that they're going to trust all the time. And I think right behind that, maybe in front of that, is government. Sorry, Keith, but not everybody trusts government. And so I think, you're right. I mean, part of this strategy in terms of adoption has always been around identifying trusted energy advisors within, or trusted advisors generally within different population segments. And I think that's a key part of the education piece. And that's why we talk about, building awareness and trust. And one of the reasons why we think ODC fits really, really well into this education piece is because they're really not seen either as the utility or government, but really as a trusted entity that's done a lot of good work for the community. And so we see that as in that 3 to 5 year strategy.
I think that overall, our leadership will get the city going too. That's what we do. We are an energy conscious city. I don't think we quite have that now. So that'll be, I'm glad to see the education on there. And
Yeah, and again, everything that's up here is my and Keith's first draft at laying it into a timeline. No mandate here at all that this is what the group runs with. That you pull other stuff up, you create more emphasis and more priority on various aspects. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. I put it out here to get it started, is really just to kind of get you discussing that and trying to, and I think, Boyd, to your point in terms of assistance, we can try to take that 3 to 5 year, but that might be where, some of the support for this SCT that we've identified in our budget, might be needed in order to help, provide the brain power, so to speak, behind some of the assumptions that go into those levers.
Is the Black and Veatch the type of firm to do something like that?
I mean, I think they've got the capability to do it. The problem I have with Black and Veatch a little bit is, and sometimes with consultants generally, is they really like a defined scope of work, and then they do what exactly is on that scope of work. And I really like to try to find somebody who is walking along with us on this journey, as opposed to just, churning out what we ask them to do. Because, garbage in, garbage out. And I think to a certain extent, if you don't do a good enough job as a community really defining the scope of work well, then what you're going to get back is challenging. So I do think that if we do bring somebody in like a Black and Veatch, and I'm not suggesting them necessarily, but whoever we do bring in, I think this group should have some time with that group to make sure that scope and your desires are very clearly understood, so that they understand what they're being asked to do in terms of providing that information to you to help you with the assessment of those levers.
And my sense, having gone through this 10 years ago and been on a task force, so that was like one of the groups working out one of the specific areas, we ended up bringing in an outside firm for a very specific study on a specific thing. And I'm imagining that it'll be more like that, where it won't be like, come alongside us for the whole thing, like a Garforth sort of broad. It'll be more like, we set some direction, we set some emphasis, and then maybe within that, a task force or us says, we need extra help here. And then you can get at some of the specificity and the scope that I think Dave is lifting up, which I think is really important.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yep, I've had terrible experiences where you're not. I could picture building codes is a really interesting one that, hey, if Michigan goes the way of, pick it, California or whatever, in certain codes, right. These codes, how effective have they been in other communities? Can you measure it? Can we put our finger on it? Should we spend more time on it? Should that be in our models? So
yeah, and is it based upon all new buildings? Is it based upon retrofit, and how old is that retrofit? How much has to be done before you do that? And when you have it that way, then how fast is it really going to turn over your building stock to a point where you have real change? So again, when you going back to that big goal, you start looking at moving up the time horizon. Is that really an effective lever for you, if that's the time horizon? Because building stock just doesn't get torn down and rebuilt at that kind of time frame.
And firm choice will change depending on the question we have, depending on the resources they have underlying. So
exactly,
that's a big
that's
deal.
What I was going to say, Boyd, is that, I think this has been a great conversation about when do you bring in that expertise, to do like an expertise, like one firm doing the level of analysis right now on a really broad scope. We're way at the top of the funnel right now. I don't think would be probably a great choice. I think we need to zero in on some different things that analyzes a lot of things that you guys are gonna, give us direction on. Things like, okay, what's the best return? Like, where are we seeing our carbon? Because we're different than a lot of other communities when we talk about benchmarking and what's the landscape of our community. Things like, okay, right now the state would have to make some decisions or some changes as to would we even be able to do mandates or not. So would we want to spend a lot of time analyzing that when that's not a lever that we can pull right now?
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of levels of kind of analysis that says, okay, what should we prioritize? And then I think that's absolutely, some of those areas we have the expertise on staff, some of those areas we don't.
Well, I think one other thing that we can do in the short term too, to kind of make sure that this list is complete. One, we can hear from other people. So, I mean, I think this group can invite in different groups to give their thoughts. But I think the other is back to what was asked earlier on benchmarking. And that's something where, we can work with ODC. We talked about maybe having a deeper dive into those comparable communities. And I think that's the key, is finding comparable and looking at the data, but also looking at the initiatives that they've undertaken or are thinking about undertaking to make sure that what's represented here, on the opportunity matrix is complete, or whether there's other things that we haven't considered in this list.
That's great. I want to be cognizant of time because it's 5. And so I don't think we'll get into the IRP today, Dave. What I propose is a few things. One is having the staff take some time to consume the survey, giving all of you a chance to spend more time in the document Dave just walked through, and thinking critically around, what other layers of information would we want to have, or maybe what new questions do we have as it relates to this more detailed opportunity matrix with the time horizons and some of the metric, the carbon impacts that they're hypothesizing. The other thing, Dave, if you could circulate is I think that you're going to have a breakdown, and I think you've had this slide in the past, but of where the, what categories are making up what parts of our metric tonnage. So we can overlay that with this, like facilities, commercial industrial facilities make up, 80% or 70% of our work, of our opportunity, right? So things like anything tied to residential might be great, but they just might not be the priority over the next few years, right? And so I think
so Brian, just to make sure that I understand what you're looking for here, and I know Tim has asked this too. So on your screen, you should have pie charts, do you?
Yep.
So there's 3 slides here. There's a detailed breakout, which gives you kind of everything: electricity on residential, commercial, industrial, residential gas, transportation, and other. And then just a slide that does it by sector. So now these are just residential, commercial, industrial, transportation without respect to the fuel. And then the other one is by fuel source without respect to the sector. So I was going to include this in your resources document.
Yeah.
If that's not what you're looking for.
No, this is it.
Okay.
I think this plus the more detailed time horizon opportunity matrix that's a great overlay of information for us to help us continue to filter, and prioritize. And then we'll take the survey data and do some analysis on what people's, where people want to spend more time. And I think that's what we come back with in 2 weeks. Is Keith and Dave and staff will have backfilled information as much as they can. We'll have looked at the surveys, and everyone here, I think, should be looking at these slides and the more detailed opportunity matrix between now and the next 2 weeks to pick this back up. Does that sound good?
Mhm. Would it be worthwhile to look at, did I read somewhere where the Ford mobility report is back?
I think, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong. I
That's
think
in the
our
resources document.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in there. Yeah.
Just one question kind of for readability. Can you share the Excel version of the opportunity matrix?
Yes. Yes, I can. Yeah.
And
Brian, I have one other suggestion too. I know Dave's going to go through the IRP next time, but I think it's one of those dense documents that it helps you to kind of look over in advance before he even talks through it. I think you get more out of it if you haven't already taken a peek at it across the team. I think your questions will be a little bit more in depth, and then having Dave go through it, I think will really help the comprehension versus trying to take it from scratch as he goes through it.
Is that something, Dave, that you were planning on, is going through the IRP with us next time?
Yeah, I have a little bit of an abbreviated version of the presentation. And so I was figuring probably need about a half an hour for that. But
that's all. That's all for the folks following along at home. That's all tied to utility, the portfolio, right?
It's the portfolio discussion, really, completely in that portfolio lever, and primarily, not 100%, but primarily it's utility owned section of the electric portfolio lever. There is some discussion in there as it represents impacts on the load forecast, for example, on the adoption of a generation that's owned by the customer. But a lot of the discussion in the IRP is really focused on the utility owned electric portfolio.
There's just some really big takeaways from the type of scenario and sensitivity analysis that was done related to renewables that really you should ponder before Dave talks about it. Because, everything we've been talking about, when you talk about being more, tougher goals, looser goals, there's just a real aha moment in this IRP for me personally that really gets you thinking. I think it'll lead to a deeper, better conversation with Dave if you don't just pick it up for the first time then.
Yeah, no, that's good, Boyd. So next time,
so
that'll be
so is Dave going to go ahead and send the abbreviated IRP out to us so that we can be at least basically informed and also have our questions ready for him as he goes through the presentation?
Well, I would suggest this, Tim, under the resources document, again, you have the IRP presentation.
Yep.
There aren't a whole lot of slides that have been omitted. There are some I just felt like were either a little redundant. So you're not getting anything new in my presentation. So I would just suggest you read that, because I think you might actually get additional information under that full presentation versus what you'd see under the abbreviated that I might talk to under the abbreviated just to make sure that it's mentioned.
Okay.
But my encouragement to the group is at least go through the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Watching the video, which is also in your resource document, is not a bad thing either, but especially if you want the context around some of the slides. But you don't have to read the full report necessarily, but at least look at the presentation that's in the resources document.
Okay,
good.
That's good. So there's a little bit of homework. Dig into the IRP. We'll learn more about that next time. We'll massage and dig into the survey results. We may follow up with you specifically on the survey to make sure that we've got your answers, so that we've got everybody's input appropriately cataloged. And again, I think this is a big exercise in prioritization so that we can more confidently make our recommendations. If you don't have an acute understanding of these pie charts, as you think about the stuff that we want to lift up and spend time digging into, like, you really need to be doing that. Like the Ford mobility proposal is a good example. Like, it's cool and we maybe should spend real time on mobility, but it's not a very big percentage of the whole pie. And we just have to be okay. Like, and again, I'm not telling us what we're going to spend deeper time on or not, but if you're not thinking about it through that lens of where is the impact, then you really should be doing that. So get familiar with those pie charts and then revisit the opportunity matrix that Dave has laid out with the time horizons. I think that that's a really robust contextual look at all this stuff.
I would also add, Brian, the other thing that we need staff to do is to start to fill out that framework document with some of the initial pieces, right? So we can't, we need to know those metrics on our community that we know. We need to start getting some of that stuff in there. And it doesn't mean things can't change, format can't change. We can edit, but I really want to stress that we don't end up with 47 different documents that we someday have to get it all into one somehow. So it'd be better to start to push that stuff into the master document a little at a time as we go.
Yeah, I think that those are on the agenda. Sorry, I skipped over that as an assumption. Because those are on the agenda, that framework doc is on the agenda every time. I'm assuming that Dave and Keith are going to be populating that. So
I want to make sure Keith is actually working. So that's all I was just making.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nothing else is happening in the city right now. This is the only thing that Dave and I and staff are spending time on.
Travis, aren't they customers now, or are they partners?
Sarcasm.
Good to hear it, Keith.
Hey, just a few other things, just kind of housekeeping details for everyone. We'll probably send sometime between now and our next meeting. Sync has been doing some work also on kind of refreshing the landing page for the community energy plan and specifically for this committee and kind of where we have it on our website so you can keep track and that we're putting good information out. So look for that. We'll probably send out a link so you can see an early version of that. And we, of course, we can always tweak that too with good suggestions.
Good.
Plus, I just want to make sure I'm looking at December 14 would be our next meeting date.
Yep.
And I'm thinking that we would probably not meet on the 28th.
Correct.
Yeah.
If not for anything else, the amount of work that we'd be able to get done between the 14th and the 28th. But then that we'd kind of, unless anyone has a suggestion, I think for Dave and I especially, it'd be nice, and probably for everyone's schedules. Are we assuming kind of that every Monday every other Monday between 3 and 5 when we don't otherwise meet for BPW? So that would land like on January 11, January 25, February 8, February 22. Just probably want to just have that discussion now, because if we're going to change that rhythm, we probably should talk about that soon.
Does anyone have an issue with that as the plan?
I'm just concerned about looking out and the realities of maybe February and being ready in March. If you know, we have to think about going to weekly for a short period of time or anything like that.
I don't think we have a distinct that we have to be done by March.
No, you don't. And
Okay.
quite frankly, I never assumed that you would.
Okay.
You're starting to get a sense now, not that you didn't know before, that this was going to take some time.
Yeah.
And I think the mayor and council know that it's going to take some time. So there is not an arbitrary, you need to have it done by X date.
Boyd, believe me, it'll get done as fast as humanly possible within the confines of, I want to be done by March, believe me, but we're not allowed to like talk offline. You know, there's so many limitations to the public nature of this thing. It's just slow. So we're going to keep it.
And honestly, I know we joke about it. I'm great with joking. I'm the first one to do it, but we just have I know Dave and we've got a lot of stuff on our plate right now. So we only can produce behind the scenes so much also.
No more vacation. Plus we're dealing with Keith.
Dave Coster, I'm showing BPW has the regular board meeting on Monday, January the 11th. Because Keith just brought up that would be the first meeting date in January. Am I correct showing that the BPW meets at 4 o'clock on Monday, the 11th?
Yeah, we're going to start running into some issues there. Ideally, if we could meet on the 4th and the 18th.
Yeah.
Oh, I got you.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, because we are scheduled the way that lines up, we start running into some issues there. So if we could do that and then assess where we are maybe at that point, because I know that February gets a little funny with how we have the BPW first meeting and then the study session, but by the time we get there, we'll have figured that out. But I think if we can plan January, at least, Keith, to be 4th and the 18th, that would be.
4th and the 18th.
Gotcha.
And then the other.
I had the Mondays mixed up.
Then, well, you've just gotten off a 2-month vacation, so we can understand.
Yeah, you wish.
Okay.
3 whole days. 3 whole days.
See, Keith, I'm not the only one that recognizes this stuff. Tim's picking up on it now too.
Yeah, and if we were to continue on with that, Keith, we could do the 1st and the 15th of February, and avoid BPW meetings also. So
I just had the wrong weeks, so
it's all right.
The other question or assumption would be is we will continue to assume Zoom until notified differently. Is that correct?
Yeah, the current order from MDHHS is set to expire on December 8.
Yep.
So theoretically, we would be ready to go and go back to in person on the 14th, but quite frankly, I would bet on that being extended. So
Yeah,
I think you're correct.
Let's just plan on Zoom, and then if somehow
we'll just communicate with you where I think what I've heard is that people really prefer and that we can do it safely in council settings if that's an option. But
the trailing impacts of this thing showing up, that we're going to be in the current situation into the middle of January at best.
Yeah, I think so too.
And
so we'll just communicate with all of you on that. We can make it work.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. Just so we have our basic premises. That's good.
That fits too really well with Keith's hibernation mode that he's gone.
Well, that's true. Because he's going back on vacation, right?
Oh,
his face is anyway.
This is the best parts of these meetings. He's just.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
All right.
No respect. No respect.
All right. So I move to adjourn the meeting, or I adjourn the meeting.
And we all support that.
Support.
100% support.
Excellent.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Be in touch. You got your homework.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.